What if Bigfoot was never alone? For decades, sightings have been dismissed as isolated encounters, a shadow crossing a road, a figure between trees, a fleeting glimpse in the fog. But what happens when a field researcher claims he discovered something far more disturbing? Not a lone creature. Not random movement. But an organized settlement, a village with structured patrols, layered perimeter defense, hierarchical leadership, and something even more unsettling, internal containment. This isn't a campfire story. It's a calculated account of coordinated behavior, boundary enforcement, and a moment when one of them nearly broke control. If even part of this is true, then the wilderness isn't empty. It's managed. And the silence you hear in deep forest may not be absence, it may be discipline. If you explore remote areas, camp in isolated terrain, or investigate deep woodland regions, pay attention to subtle signs: stacked stones where none should be, cameras repositioned without damage, silence that feels intentional, and the sensation of being escorted rather than chased. You may not be alone. And you may not be the observer. Do you believe Bigfoot sightings are random, or part of something organized? Drop your theory below. If you enjoy deep wilderness mysteries, structured encounter reports, and high-level cryptid analysis, subscribe and turn notifications on. There's more coming. Because if one village exists, how many others are out there? I never intended to speak publicly about what I found. For 22 years, I worked as a field researcher in remote forest ecosystems across the Pacific Northwest. My specialty was habitat mapping and large mammal migration corridors. I believed in data, not folklore, in measurable patterns, not legends, in soil samples, not campfire stories. Until the day my instruments began recording movement that did not align with any known species. The first anomaly appeared during a thermal drone sweep near a restricted watershed zone. The signatures were upright, multiple, moving in coordinated formation. Too large for elk, too deliberate for bears. They did not scatter when the drone approached. They repositioned. That was the first detail that unsettled me. Wild animals retreat. Predators stalk. But these figures adjusted to surveillance. They moved into tree cover strategically, shielding smaller shapes behind larger bodies, as if protecting something. I told myself it was an error, thermal distortion, faulty calibration. But when I ran the sweep again, the pattern repeated. Same clearing. Same perimeter alignment. Same defensive formation. The coordinates were deep beyond marked trail systems, an area with no recorded settlements, no logging access, no hunting cabins, just dense, old-growth forest untouched for generations. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed the footage frame by frame. There were smaller heat signatures among the larger ones, not random but clustered, stationary near what looked like structural shapes. Structures. The word refused to leave my mind. The next morning, I initiated a ground approach. Standard procedure: verify visually, document evidence, disprove the anomaly, return to routine research. But as I hiked into that sector, the forest changed. Birdsong diminished. Wind movement felt dampened. Even insect noise seemed distant. The silence was not absence, it was anticipation. About 2 miles in, I found the first marker. Not a footprint. Not broken branches. A boundary line. Large stones stacked deliberately at shoulder height, forming parallel rows that extended through the trees. Too symmetrical to be natural. Too hidden to be accidental. That was when a question surfaced in my mind that I could not dismiss. What if this wasn't a territory? What if it was a settlement? I pressed forward anyway. Curiosity is a dangerous fuel, especially when it overrides instinct, especially when you begin to realize you are no longer observing randomly, you are being measured in return. At 14:37, my body camera recorded something I still struggle to categorize. Beyond the stone boundary, the forest floor opened into a wide, concealed clearing. And within that clearing, partially obscured by woven branches and interlocked trunks shaped with deliberate intent, stood structures. Not random debris. Not collapsed shelters. Structures arranged in circular formation, reinforced with timber, insulated with layered bark, positioned with defensive spacing as if designed for protection and permanence. I froze at the tree line, my breath shallow, my training insisting there must be a rational explanation. Yet the layout resembled a primitive village, central open space, perimeter dwellings, elevated lookout points built into natural rises of terrain. You might tell yourself, as I did in that moment, that isolation can distort perception. That stress can exaggerate interpretation. But deep down, a colder realization began to settle in. This was not a passing migration site. This was not a temporary feeding ground. This was intentional habitation. And if that conclusion was correct, then the most disturbing implication was I remained at the edge of the clearing longer than I should have, crouched behind a fallen cedar, trying to steady my breathing without drawing attention to myself. My training told me to document, to observe, to avoid interference. But something far older than training was whispering a different warning: you have crossed a line. The circular layout of the structures was no accident. The spacing created clear sightlines across the entire settlement, eliminating blind spots. If I could see into the village from my position, then it was statistically certain that something inside it could already see me. The architecture was primitive only at first glance. The outer frames were constructed from thick timber driven deep into the soil, angled inward for reinforcement. Interwoven branches created dense walls, sealed with mud and layered bark for insulation. Some of the larger structures had elevated platforms built into adjacent trees, accessible by notched trunks that functioned like ladders. These were not random shelters assembled in haste. They reflected planning, labor, and continuity. You do not build like this unless you intend to remain. Then I noticed movement. A tall figure stepped between two of the dwellings, partially obscured by filtered sunlight. It stood upright, broad-shouldered, covered in dark brown fur that blended almost perfectly with the bark around it. The proportions were wrong for a bear and unmistakably not human. Its head turned slowly, scanning the perimeter with deliberate precision. This was not wandering behavior. It was surveillance. Behind it, smaller figures moved low to the ground. Juveniles. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The smaller heat signatures I had seen on the drone footage were not anomalies. They were offspring. Families. If you were standing where I was standing, watching what I was watching, you would feel the same realization tightening your chest. This was not a solitary cryptid encounter. This was a community. I adjusted my body camera angle slightly, careful not to create sudden movement. That was when another figure emerged on the opposite side of the clearing, larger than the first. It moved with a slow, controlled gait, placing each step with awareness of sound. It paused near a central structure and tilted its head upward, directly toward the tree line where I was concealed. I stopped breathing. There is a specific moment in predator-prey encounters when roles become uncertain. I have studied wolves. I have tracked cougars. There is always a threshold when the animal decides whether you are a threat, prey, or irrelevant. In that moment, watching that massive shape standing motionless while facing my direction, I understood something disturbing. I was being evaluated. A low vibration traveled through the clearing, not a roar, not a howl, but a resonant sound produced deep in the chest. It carried across the ground more than through the air. Several of the smaller figures immediately retreated behind structures. The adults shifted positions, subtly forming a wider perimeter around the central space. Defensive pattern. You might tell yourself that you would slowly back away. That you would retreat with calm discipline. I tried. I shifted my weight carefully, 1 inch at a time. But the instant my boot pressed against dry bark, snapping it beneath my heel, every head in that clearing turned in perfect synchronization. There is something profoundly unsettling about coordinated awareness. They did not panic. They did not charge. They simply locked onto my exact position. And then one of them began walking toward me. Not running. Not aggressive. Intentional. Each step measured. Each movement silent despite its size. The distance between us began to close, and I felt a realization that no field manual prepares you for. I was not discovering their village. I had triggered a response protocol. The figure approaching me did not rush. It did not display its teeth or beat its chest. It moved with a calm authority that was far more disturbing than aggression. At approximately 7.5 feet tall, its shoulders were wide, its arms disproportionately long, its gait balanced and efficient. Dark brown fur covered most of its body, but I could see patches where the skin beneath appeared thick and gray, almost scarred by age. This was not a wild animal reacting emotionally. This was something assessing variables. I remained frozen, calculating options that were rapidly disappearing. If I retreated abruptly, I would trigger pursuit. If I stood upright, I would expose myself fully. If I ran, I would lose instantly. My heart rate was accelerating so violently that I worried it would be audible. The creature stopped roughly 30 yards from my position and angled its head slightly, as if listening to something beyond normal auditory range. Then I heard it. A second vibration from deeper within the settlement, lower in tone. Communication. The approaching figure responded with a subtle shift in posture. Not submission. Not challenge. A signal exchange. Behind it, I could see two others repositioning near the flanks of the clearing. They were not reacting randomly. They were triangulating. In that moment, a terrifying clarity formed in my mind. This was not first contact. This was perimeter enforcement. The approaching figure lowered its head slightly, nostrils flaring. I remembered the countless reports from witnesses claiming these beings smell intent. I had dismissed that phrase as folklore dramatization. But watching the way it inhaled the air, slowly, deliberately, I realized scent was only part of the equation. It was reading micro-movements. Heartbeat changes. Muscle tension. It was analyzing threat potential. If you were in my position, you would feel the instinct to prove you were not hostile. I slowly opened my left hand and placed it palm down against the forest floor, lowering my posture without fully exposing myself. I avoided direct eye contact while keeping it within peripheral vision. Among large mammals, direct staring is escalation. For several seconds, though it felt like minutes, we remained locked in that suspended calculation. Then something unexpected happened. The creature extended one arm slightly to the side, not toward me, but outward parallel to the tree line. It made a brief, sharp clicking sound with its throat. Immediately, I sensed movement behind me. A third presence had already positioned itself along my retreat path. They had anticipated escape before I had fully processed it. The lead figure took one more step forward. Close enough now that I could see the detail in its face. The brow ridge was heavy, eyes deep set and dark, but not animalistically vacant. There was focus there. Awareness. A level of cognition that forced my mind into a painful reclassification of everything I thought I understood about apex predators. It was not deciding whether to attack. It was deciding what I represented. Another low vibration rippled through the clearing, and this time I noticed the juveniles peering cautiously from behind structures. They were observing me. Studying me. Just as I had studied wildlife my entire career. The realization was humbling and horrifying at once. In their environment, I was the anomaly. The lead figure slowly straightened to its full height. The display was not overtly aggressive, but it was unmistakably dominant. A boundary demonstration. When the lead figure stepped back, the entire perimeter adjusted with it. Not chaotically. Not reactively. The movement was synchronized, controlled, almost disciplined. The flanking presence behind me did not vanish, but it eased its position, maintaining distance while still blocking any reckless withdrawal. This was not mercy. It was containment. The central clearing remained quiet except for faint rustling and low tonal exchanges I could feel more than hear. My body camera was still running. My mind was not. It was struggling to reconcile what my eyes were confirming. This was organized habitation with layered roles guards, juveniles, structural planners, and something else I had not yet identified. The larger figure turned slightly and directed its gaze toward the center of the settlement. That was when I noticed it clearly for the first time. At the exact middle of the circular formation stood the largest structure in the clearing. It was reinforced with thicker timber, elevated slightly above ground level, and framed with interlocked trunks that had been stripped and shaped. The entryway was partially concealed by layered bark panels that could be moved aside. This was not random architecture. It was hierarchical. Two smaller adults approached the central structure and stood near its entrance. Their postures shifted, subtle but distinct. Less defensive. More attentive. I had seen similar body language in primate troops when a dominant elder was present. The lead figure glanced back at me briefly, then emitted a low, sustained vibration unlike the earlier perimeter signals. The bark panels at the central structure shifted. Something emerged slowly from within. The figure that stepped forward was not as physically imposing as the perimeter guards, but its presence altered the atmosphere instantly. Its fur was lighter, streaked with gray. The movement was slower, measured, almost deliberate in its pacing. The others adjusted their posture, not submissive, but deferential. If you were standing where I was, watching this unfold, you would feel the same cold awareness settling in. This was not a random gathering of territorial creatures. This was governance. The elder's eyes scanned the clearing, then fixed on the lead guard. A brief exchange of low sounds followed, short pulses, distinct variations in tone. The guard responded once, turning its head slightly toward my position without fully facing me. The elder then looked directly at the tree line. Directly at me. There is something deeply unsettling about being acknowledged by something you were never meant to encounter. Not startled. Not confused. Recognized. The elder took several steps forward, stopping just beyond the center point of the clearing. The guards widened their formation subtly, not to threaten me, but to ensure distance remained controlled. The juveniles retreated completely behind the outer structures. I realized then that I was witnessing more than curiosity. I was part of a decision process. The elder lifted its head slightly, inhaling deeply. Its eyes did not leave my position. The forest seemed to compress inward, every sound muted beneath the weight of that gaze. My instincts screamed to leave, but my legs would not move. Not from paralysis, something more complicated. If I ran now, I would validate threat. If I advanced, I would cross a final line. The elder lowered its chin and made a single, resonant sound that carried through the clearing like a pulse through water. The perimeter guards the shift in their posture was immediate and unmistakable. The guards no longer centered their awareness on me. Their bodies angled outward, shoulders squared toward the deeper forest behind the settlement. The elder did not retreat. It remained still, but its head tilted slightly, listening. Not to me. Not to wind. To something moving beyond the perimeter. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, branches breaking in irregular rhythm. Not the cautious steps I had observed inside the village. This was heavier. Less controlled. The sound carried from the northern tree line, beyond the stone boundary I had crossed earlier. Whatever was approaching did not move with the disciplined silence of the village. The nearest guard emitted a low, sharp pulse. Instantly, two others moved in coordinated arcs, placing themselves between the central structure and the direction of the noise. Their movement was strategic, not panicked. Defensive, but practiced. You don't execute formation like that without repetition. If you were in my position, your mind would be racing. Another predator? A rival group? Human intruders? I felt a surge of dread at the final possibility. If a logging team or hunters were approaching, they had no idea what space they were entering. The elder shifted its gaze briefly toward me, then back toward the forest. That glance felt deliberate. As if weighing two variables simultaneously. The message was not spoken, but I understood it. You are no longer the primary concern. The crashing grew louder. Closer. And then I saw movement between the trees. At first, just a flash of dark mass. Taller than a bear. Moving fast, but not fluid. It stumbled through underbrush, knocking branches aside rather than weaving through them. The contrast was stark. Where the village moved with control, this presence moved with force. A guard stepped forward and released a deep, vibrating call that rolled through the ground like distant thunder. The approaching figure halted abruptly. For a split second, everything froze. Then it stepped into partial view. It resembled them bipedal, covered in dark fur, but its posture was different. Hunched. Muscles coiled in restless tension. Its head jerked in sharp, erratic movements rather than smooth scans. Its chest heaved visibly, breath rapid. This was not a composed guardian. This was agitation embodied. The perimeter tightened. The elder emitted a single, low-frequency tone. Not loud, but commanding. The guards adjusted again, forming a wide semicircle that separated the agitated figure from the central structures. The juveniles were completely concealed now. What I was witnessing was not random territorial defense. It was containment of their own kind. The agitated figure let out a harsh, guttural sound that cut through the clearing. It took one aggressive step forward, testing the boundary. 3 guards responded instantly, closing distance by half without breaking formation. Their movements were controlled, synchronized, and unmistakably tactical. If you had ever believed these beings were solitary monsters lurking at the edge of civilization, that belief would collapse in this moment. The moment the agitated figure shifted its weight toward me, the entire formation reacted with explosive precision. The nearest guard lunged sideways, not at me, but directly into the path of the unstable one. The collision was controlled but powerful, a deliberate body check that redirected momentum without escalating into full violence. The sound that followed was unlike anything I had ever heard in the wild. It was not a roar, not a howl. It was a layered vibration, multiple tones overlapping as several members vocalized simultaneously. Communication at speed. Command signals. The agitated figure snapped its jaws, not toward the guard, but toward the open space between us. A warning display. Its shoulders flexed, claws digging into soil. For a split second, I was certain it would break formation and charge. But it didn't. 2 additional guards closed in from either flank, narrowing the corridor between me and it. They did not attack. They constrained. Their posture made something unmistakably clear: I was not prey in this moment. I was a destabilizing variable. The elder stepped forward for the first time since the disturbance began. Slow. Unhurried. Its presence alone shifted the atmosphere. The vibrating tones softened, lowering in frequency. The guards held position, but their aggression receded into rigid containment. The unstable one paced in tight arcs, breathing hard, head jerking toward me again and again. If you had been standing where I was, you would feel the shift instantly. This individual was younger. Strong. Impulsive. The kind of presence that in any hierarchical system tests boundaries. The elder emitted a sharp, singular tone. Everything stopped. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. The agitated figure froze mid-step. Its chest still rose and fell rapidly, but its body locked into place. The elder approached within arm's reach. No display of force. No visible threat. Just proximity. Then, slowly, the elder placed one massive hand against the younger one's chest. Not violently. Deliberately. The message was unmistakable: stand down. Several long seconds passed. The younger figure's breathing slowed. Its shoulders lowered fractionally. The tension did not vanish, but it was contained. I understood then something profoundly unsettling. This was not random wilderness behavior. This was internal conflict management. The elder withdrew its hand and turned slightly, positioning its body between the unstable one and me. A barrier. Protective, but not of me. Protective of order. The guards eased back half a step, widening the space again. The unstable figure remained where it stood, eyes still fixed in my direction, but no longer advancing. I realized with chilling clarity that the only reason I was still standing there was not because I had avoided detection. It was because they had decided I was not worth destabilizing their structure over. The elder looked toward the tree line again, toward me, and held my gaze for several seconds. There was no confusion there. No animalistic blankness. Only assessment. You are outside this system. You are not invited inside it. And you will leave." The elder lowered its head slightly, not in submission but in finality. And the guard subtly shifted, opening a narrow corridor back toward the stone boundary I had crossed earlier. An exit. Granted, not offered. Behind me, I could feel the forest waiting. Ahead of me, an entire civilization stood in disciplined silence. The corridor they created was narrow, deliberate, and unmistakable. 2 guards stood several yards apart, forming a silent passage back toward the stone boundary. They did not look at me constantly. They didn't need to. Their peripheral awareness tracked every micro-movement I made. If you had been in my position, you would understand that this was not an invitation. It was a controlled withdrawal. A managed release. I moved slowly. No sudden shifts. No direct eye contact. My boots felt impossibly loud against the forest floor, even though I was stepping with trained precision. Every breath I took felt measured, exposed. The unstable one remained where it stood, chest rising and falling heavily, eyes locked onto my back. I could feel that gaze-like pressure against my spine. The elder remained near the center, still, composed, as if this entire incident had already been calculated and filed away. Halfway to the stone boundary, I made the mistake of glancing over my shoulder. They were watching in full synchronization. Not stalking. Not threatening. Documenting. I crossed the stacked stone line at 15:12. The moment my boot cleared the boundary, something shifted behind me. A low tone resonated through the clearing. When I turned again, the corridor had closed. The guards returned to their perimeter positions as if I had never been there. Within seconds, movement resumed inside the village. Structured. Controlled. The younger, unstable one had been guided back toward the outer edge of the clearing, still monitored by 2 larger figures. The elder retreated toward the central structure. The system had reset. I stood just beyond the boundary for several seconds, waiting for adrenaline to crash through me. It didn't. Instead, what I felt was something far more disturbing. Perspective shift. Every wildlife study I had conducted. Every classification of apex predator. Every assumption that humans sat uncontested at the top of cognitive dominance in forest ecosystems. All of it fractured in that clearing. I began the hike back toward my staging point, but the forest no longer felt empty. It felt layered. Structured. Patrolled. About a mile from the clearing, I heard movement parallel to my path. Not crashing. Tracking. One set of footsteps matched my pace from a distance of perhaps 30 yards. When I slowed, it slowed. When I accelerated, it adjusted. Not aggressive pursuit escort. They were ensuring compliance. You would like to believe that once you leave something like that behind, you are free. That the encounter ends at the boundary. But as I reached the final ridge overlooking the access trail, the escort stopped. I didn't hear it leave. I simply felt the absence. That night, reviewing my body camera footage, I expected clarity. Instead, I found distortion. Static interference at key moments. Audio compression during tonal exchanges. Frames where movement blurred unnaturally despite stable focus. The footage of the unstable one shifting toward me was partially corrupted. But one segment remained perfectly intact. The elder's gaze. Clear. Uninterrupted. Direct. When I zoomed into the frame, something became evident that I had not processed fully in the moment. The elder had not been looking at me with curiosity. It had been measuring restraint. And the deeper implication settled in slowly, like a weight pressing down on my chest. If that younger one had broken formation, the outcome would not have been random violence. It would have been strategic. I did not report the encounter immediately. That may sound irresponsible, but any researcher in my position would understand the hesitation. Extraordinary claims end careers. And what I had witnessed was not just extraordinary, it implied organized intelligence in a species officially categorized as myth. For 48 hours, I analyzed the footage privately. Frame by frame. Audio layer by audio layer. The tonal vibrations they produced were not random noise. When isolated and slowed, distinct patterns emerged. Certain frequencies preceded coordinated movement. Others corresponded with posture shifts. It was not language as we define it, but it was structured signaling. If you had been sitting at that workstation with me, watching the synchronization unfold repeatedly, you would feel the same slow realization creeping in: this was a communication system refined through repetition. I mapped their movement across the clearing using motion tracking software. The formation arcs were symmetrical. The containment response toward the unstable individual followed a triangular convergence pattern, classic group control geometry seen in trained tactical units. This was not instinct alone. It was doctrine. Then I noticed something I had missed in the field. In the background of the central structure footage, partially obscured by shadow, were vertical shapes carved into stripped timber. Not decorative scratches. Not random gouges. Repeated linear marks in consistent spacing. Markings. I enhanced the image resolution as far as the camera allowed. The carvings appeared deliberate, clustered near the entrance of the elder's dwelling. Some marks were deeper than others, layered over time. You might try to rationalize it as environmental wear. But the symmetry was too intentional. These were not claw marks from agitation. They were records. The implication was destabilizing. If they marked structure, they tracked events. If they tracked events, they preserved memory. And if they preserved memory, then my presence had likely been added to that record. I ran a thermal comparison of the unstable one's posture versus the perimeter guards. Muscle tension patterns were visibly different. Elevated surface heat along the shoulders and neck suggested heightened adrenaline state. The others remained regulated, even during the confrontation. The elder's thermal signature was the most stable of all. Lower external heat fluctuation. Slower respiration. Physiological control. That detail unsettled me more than anything else. In most species, elders lose physical dominance. In this system, authority appeared neurological. I finally submitted a partial anomaly report to my supervisor, sanitized, stripped of language that would trigger immediate dismissal. I framed it as unidentified primate-like heat signatures with coordinated behavior. The response was predictable. Equipment malfunction. Thermal artifact. Environmental misinterpretation. I was advised to recalibrate and avoid speculative terminology. I did not argue. But that same night, something happened that eliminated any remaining doubt about what I had walked into. At 2:17 a.m., a motion alert triggered on a remote trail camera positioned nearly 3 miles from the clearing. I opened the feed expecting deer. What I saw instead made my blood run cold. A single upright figure stood directly in front of the camera. Still. Centered. Looking straight into the lens. It was not random crossing behavior. It had approached the device intentionally. And before stepping away, it reached out and tapped the camera housing once. Deliberately. As if acknowledging surveillance. As if returning it. The timestamp was clear. The distance from the village was deliberate. The message required no translation. We know you are watching. And we are watching back. I did not sleep after the trail camera incident. I replayed the clip repeatedly, analyzing body posture, head tilt, hand movement. The tap against the housing was not exploratory. It was controlled, precise pressure, then withdrawal. The figure did not damage the camera. It did not attempt to conceal itself. It stepped back slowly, maintaining eye contact with the lens until it exited the frame. That detail mattered. Predators avoid eye contact with foreign objects unless threatened. Curious animals sniff, paw, bite. This was neither curiosity nor aggression. It was demonstration. If you were watching that clip with me at 3 in the morning, you would feel it too, the deliberate nature of it. This was not accidental discovery of equipment. It was inspection. At dawn, I checked 3 additional cameras within a 5-mile radius. 2 had been physically rotated 180 degrees. 1 had been elevated and placed on a higher branch. No damage. No shattered casing. Just repositioned. Controlled interference. The implication formed with clinical clarity: they were mapping our observation network. Later that afternoon, I returned to the ridge overlooking the watershed sector, but I did not cross the stone boundary again. I remained at distance, scanning with binoculars. The clearing itself was invisible from that angle, concealed by deliberate tree preservation. But I observed movement along the outer perimeter. Patrol routes. 3 individuals moved in staggered intervals, maintaining visual spacing between one another. Not random wandering. Repetitive arcs. If you still believe these beings were solitary creatures hiding from human civilization, this pattern would force revision. This was border management. As the sun lowered, I felt something shift in the air behind me. A subtle change in forest acoustics. When I turned slowly, I saw it about 50 yards upslope. A single figure standing partially obscured by cedar trunks. Not the unstable one. Not the elder. This one was broad, heavy-set, with darker fur along the shoulders. It did not approach. It did not retreat. It observed. The distance between us remained constant for nearly 10 minutes as I adjusted my position. When I shifted left, it adjusted right. Maintaining visual alignment. Not threatening. Not hiding. You would realize in that moment what I did: I was being studied in return. I lowered my binoculars slowly and stepped backward, maintaining non-aggressive posture. The figure remained still. Only when I had moved approximately 20 yards downslope did it finally turn away. The message was becoming structured. Approach is tolerated within limits. Surveillance is acknowledged. Repetition will escalate. That night, something changed again. At 1:42 a.m., my staging cabin's external motion sensor activated. I retrieved my flashlight, keeping indoor lights off. Through the window, at the edge of the tree line roughly 80 yards from the structure, I saw 2 silhouettes. Upright. Still. They did not advance toward the cabin. They did not vocalize. They simply stood there for several minutes before stepping backward into darkness. It was not intimidation. It was calibration. Distance assessment. Reaction measurement. They were learning my routine. And that realization settled heavier than any physical threat ever could. Because it meant the encounter at the village had not ended. It had transitioned. After the cabin incident, I knew something had shifted from passive containment to active monitoring. They were no longer reacting to my presence inside their territory. They were extending awareness outward. The perimeter had expanded. For 2 days, I deliberately avoided the watershed sector. I reduced camera deployments. I altered my movement schedule. I varied departure times. If you were in my position, you would try the same, testing whether the observation continued when patterns changed. It did. On the 3rd evening, I drove 12 miles south to a secondary trailhead, far from the original clearing. No known overlap with the village territory. I hiked 2 miles in, set a temporary thermal recorder, and returned before nightfall. At 23:08, the recorder activated. Single heat signature. Stationary. Facing the device. The coordinates confirmed it was outside their primary boundary. The escort had widened. That was when professional curiosity overcame caution. At 5:30 the following morning, I made a decision I should not have made. I returned to the stone boundary. Not to enter. Only to observe from distance. But when I reached the stacked stones, something was different. The boundary had changed. Additional stones had been added. The line was thicker. Higher. More visible. It was not natural drift. It was modification. A message. You have reached the limit. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that reinforced barrier. If you were in my place, you would feel the pull, the unbearable need to confirm whether the clearing remained active. I stepped over the line again. The reaction was immediate. Not from inside the clearing. From behind me. A deep, resonant tone rolled through the forest from a position I had not anticipated. My body stiffened. I turned slowly. Two figures stood between me and my exit route. Silent. Blocking. They had anticipated repetition. I realized, with a tightening in my chest, that the escort protocol from the first encounter had evolved. This was not containment after entry. This was interception before access. The forest ahead remained still, but I could feel presence deeper within. Movement shifting in coordinated arcs. The system was activating before I reached visual contact. I raised both hands slightly, palms outward, lowering my posture. The two behind me did not advance, but they did not retreat. A third vibration sounded closer now, deeper in tone. The Elder. It emerged from the trees ahead of the clearing, not fully entering open space, but close enough for recognition. It did not approach as before. It stopped at the reinforced boundary and stared directly at me. No corridor formed this time. No controlled exit. The message was unmistakable. First entry, tolerated anomaly. Second entry, violation. The Elder emitted a short, abrupt tone. The two behind me stepped forward in perfect synchronization. Not charging. Advancing. Measured. If you had believed the first encounter was a warning, this was confirmation. I stepped backward immediately, crossing the boundary line again. The moment my heel cleared the stones, the advance stopped. The Elder held my gaze for several seconds longer than before. There was no hostility in its eyes. But there was something far colder. Finality. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees without another sound. The two behind me melted back into the forest just as silently. I remained standing there, heart-hammering, understanding fully what had just occurred. The first visit had been evaluated. The second had been denied. And if there were a third, it would not be managed. After the second boundary breach, the atmosphere around my cabin changed. It wasn't louder. It wasn't more aggressive. It was quieter. Controlled. The kind of silence that follows a decision. For 2 nights, nothing happened. No motion alerts. No silhouettes at the tree line. No rotated cameras. If you were in my position, you might convince yourself the escalation had ended. That the reinforced boundary was enough. On the third night, at 0:56, every external sensor triggered simultaneously. Not staggered. Simultaneously. That detail alone sent a cold surge through me. Sensors placed at different distances should activate in sequence if something approaches linearly. This was not linear movement. It was coordinated positioning. I moved to the window slowly, keeping interior lights off. My breath felt loud in my own ears. When my eyes adjusted to the darkness beyond the glass, I saw them. 4 figures. Evenly spaced along the tree line. Upright. Still. They were not concealed this time. They stood partially visible, just inside shadow, allowing moonlight to define their outlines. Broad shoulders. Long arms. Stable stance. Not one moved. It was not intimidation in the dramatic sense. It was demonstration of reach. If you were watching from that cabin window, you would understand instantly this was not random presence. This was perimeter mapping of my location. I stepped outside deliberately, flashlight lowered, beam angled toward the ground to avoid direct confrontation. My posture was open. Non-threatening. A calculated risk. The moment the door opened, a low vibration rippled through the air, not from one direction, but layered. A warning, but not an attack signal. I took 3 slow steps forward. The figures did not retreat. They did not advance. They held distance with surgical precision. 80 yards. 75. When I reached approximately 70 yards from the nearest one, it shifted its weight slightly forward. Not aggression. Limit indicator. I stopped immediately. For nearly 30 seconds, we remained like that, balanced on invisible geometry. I felt the exact point of tolerance. A line drawn without stones this time. Then, from deeper within the forest behind them, a tone sounded. Lower. Familiar. The elder. The 4 figures responded instantly, stepping backward in synchronized motion. Not turning their backs, just retreating into darkness while maintaining orientation toward me. The formation dissolved. Silence returned. But the message had changed again. They had not come to threaten the cabin. They had come to measure how far I would step beyond it. The next morning, I found something placed exactly 20 feet from my cabin door. Not thrown. Not scattered. Placed. A single stacked stone. At shoulder height. Matching the boundary construction from the clearing. If you still believed this was instinctual animal behavior, that detail would force reconsideration. They had extended their boundary concept to me. Not as inclusion. As warning. The forest did not belong to me. And they were ensuring I understood the scale of their territory. The implications settled heavier than any physical confrontation ever could. They were not hiding in remote America. They were managing it. After the stone appeared at my cabin, I stopped thinking in terms of isolated encounters. I began thinking in terms of system architecture. Territory is not just space. It is pattern. I overlaid my GPS movement logs with the locations of camera interference, escort behavior, and visual contact. A geometric structure began to emerge. The clearing was not central in a random way. It was positioned at the intersection of natural ridgelines, water access points, and acoustic corridors where sound traveled efficiently without exposing exact origin. If you were analyzing that data beside me, you would recognize the same thing I did. The village was not placed for concealment alone. It was optimized for control. Outer patrol arcs overlapped at key elevation points. Interception during my second boundary crossing occurred before I reached visual contact, meaning observation posts existed beyond the clearing. The night at my cabin revealed multi-point positioning. They could deploy outward in coordinated fashion without collapsing their core structure. This was layered defense. Inner circle, elder and juveniles. Middle ring, disciplined perimeter guards. Outer ring, mobile patrols capable of expansion. And beyond that, monitoring of human routines. I revisited the footage of the unstable individual. It had not acted randomly. It had reacted to my presence in a way that disrupted balance. The containment response was immediate. The elder's intervention was decisive. Conflict was resolved without fracture. That means one thing. Internal deviation is rare. Which implies long-standing cohesion. I returned to the ridge again, but not to cross the boundary. Only to observe acoustic behavior. I remained motionless for over an hour. Eventually, a low-frequency resonance pulsed through the forest floor. Too subtle to register clearly on standard recording equipment. But perceptible. Moments later, movement occurred along two separate ridgelines in opposite directions. Signal relay. You might think communication over distance requires vocalization volume. It does not. Low-frequency sound travels through ground more efficiently than through air. Elephants use it. Certain primates exhibit early forms of it. But what I recorded was structured timing. Call. Pause. Response. Reposition. This was not scattered survival. It was coordinated territory management across miles. The most unsettling realization came when I compared historical missing person clusters in adjacent forest regions. Patterns existed, locations where individuals vanished without traditional predator signs. Not torn clothing. Not blood trails. Just disappearance. I am not claiming direct causation. But I am stating this clearly. If a species capable of structured patrol, hierarchical governance, acoustic relay, and boundary enforcement exists, then accidental human intrusion would not always result in visible conflict. It would result in removal. Quiet. Efficient. Contained. And suddenly the reinforced boundary at the clearing made more sense. It was not meant to keep humans out. It was meant to prevent unstable internal elements from moving beyond designated zones. Which leads to a question far more disturbing than whether they exist. If they are capable of containment. What happens when containment fails? Because the unstable one I saw in that clearing had not looked fully restrained. And the 3 nights after mapping the patrol arcs, the forest shifted again. Not gradually. Abruptly. At 2114, a series of tonal vibrations pulsed through the watershed region in rapid succession. Not the slow, measured signals I had recorded before. These were sharper. Compressed. Urgent. Even before checking equipment, I felt it physically. The ground seemed to carry tension. If you were standing outside that night, you would feel the same unease, like the atmosphere had tightened. I activated the long-range thermal scope from the ridge. Movement appeared along the outer perimeter. Multiple signatures converging toward a single sector north of the clearing. Not spreading. Not patrolling. Converging. Then I saw it. A single heat signature moving erratically beyond the designated patrol arcs. Larger than the juveniles. Faster than standard guard gate. It was breaking outward away from the village core. The unstable one. Its movement pattern was unmistakable, direct, forceful, not weaving through terrain but pushing through it. Branches fractured in its wake. Patrol units adjusted rapidly, attempting interception. But this time, the geometry failed. The unstable figure crossed beyond the outermost arc. Beyond structured containment. Into unmanaged forest. The tonal pulses intensified. Lower frequencies overlapped in layered succession. It was not chaos, but it was the closest I had seen to strain within their system. If you had believed their control was absolute, that illusion would fracture watching this unfold. The unstable one was not wandering. It was advancing. And its trajectory led toward a direction I recognized. Southwest. Toward rural cabins. Toward scattered human properties. My cabin sat nearly 5 miles from the clearing. Not directly in line, but within expanded patrol radius. If the unstable one continued outward, it would reach human structures within hours. The patrol units accelerated. 2 moved in parallel flanks, attempting to narrow its path. A third angled ahead to intercept from elevation. Precision tactics. But speed favors impulse. The unstable one altered direction abruptly, forcing one flanking unit to reposition. In that split second of misalignment, it broke past the narrowing corridor. For the first time since I entered their territory, I heard something unmistakable. A roar. Not a territorial warning. Not a communication pulse. Raw. Unfiltered. Frustration. The elder's tone followed immediately after, deep, sustained, commanding. But the unstable one did not slow. It had crossed from internal deviation to external threat. If you were watching that thermal overlay beside me, your mind would reach the same conclusion mine did. The system was designed to prevent this exact scenario. And it had just failed. The unstable heat signature moved beyond my equipment's effective range. The patrol units continued pursuit. Then, suddenly, all signals stopped. No further pulses. No more convergence. No visible motion. The forest went silent. Not calm. Vacant. As if something had passed through a threshold. And that was the moment a realization took hold of me, cold and immovable. The boundary was never about protecting humans from them. It was about protecting them from one of their own. The silence that followed the breach lasted 48 hours. No tonal pulses. No patrol signatures. No silhouettes near my cabin. If you had not witnessed the escalation, you might believe the forest had returned to normal. But normal has texture. Insects resume rhythm. Small mammals reappear. Wind carries ordinary patterns of movement. This silence was different. It was recalibration. On the third morning, I made one final decision. I returned to the ridge. Not out of curiosity this time. Out of necessity. When I reached visual range of the stone boundary, my breath stopped. The reinforced line had been altered again. Not thickened. Partially dismantled. Several stacked stones had been knocked aside. Not scattered randomly, displaced along a clear outward trajectory. There had been force here. Beyond the boundary, the clearing itself looked unchanged at first glance. Structures intact. Perimeter arcs restored. Movement resumed. But the geometry was different. The patrol arcs were tighter. The spacing between guards reduced. Juveniles were not visible. The central structure remained sealed. And the elder stood alone near the boundary. It did not step forward. It did not signal. It simply looked outward into the forest beyond its territory. Longer than before. As if measuring distance that had already expanded. I did not cross the boundary again. I did not need to. The message was clear in every subtle adjustment. Containment had been attempted. Containment had been strained. Containment had been restored. But at cost. If you were standing there beside me, watching that village breathe in disciplined silence, you would feel the weight of it. This was not a myth hidden in trees. This was a parallel civilization operating under rules we barely understand. They are not wandering monsters. They are not random predators. They are structured. Strategic. Hierarchical. Capable of restraint. And capable of force when restraint fails. I have not returned since that day. The footage remains archived under restricted classification. My official reports mention unidentified coordinated primate behavior. Nothing more. But I will say this clearly. If someone claims to have seen a lone Bigfoot roaming near rural properties, consider the possibility that it is not alone. Consider the possibility that it belongs to something organized. And consider the far more disturbing possibility that what I found was not the only village. The forest is vast. Its ridgelines connect across states. And if even one settlement exists with layered patrol, governance, and boundary enforcement, then we are not the only structured intelligence managing these wilderness corridors. The true terror is not that they are hidden. It is that they are present. Watching. Containing. Deciding. And if containment ever fully fails, you will not hear chaos first. You will hear silence. Because the quiet is never empty. It is strategic. I have been asked one question more than any other since I quietly began sharing fragments of this account. Why are you telling this now? The answer is simple. Because the narrative most people carry about these beings is dangerously incomplete. You imagine a solitary creature crossing highways at night. A shadow behind a tree. A fleeting glimpse captured on unstable footage. But what I witnessed was not solitary. It was systemic. And systems do not disappear when ignored. If you ever choose to explore deep wilderness, truly remote terrain, beyond mapped recreation zones, understand something clearly. The absence of human presence does not equal absence of structure. We operate under the assumption that intelligence expresses itself in cities, technology, satellites. But intelligence can also express itself in patrol arcs, acoustic relays, stone boundaries, and hierarchical enforcement. You might believe that if such a civilization existed, we would have proof by now. Visible conflict. Recovered remains. Open confrontation. But consider this instead. If they are capable of internal containment. If they are capable of coordinated removal. If they are capable of monitoring surveillance equipment without destroying it. Then the most efficient strategy is not exposure. It is control of narrative through silence. Think back to the unstable one. The breach. The convergence. The sudden disappearance of signals. The dismantled stones. Something happened beyond that outer arc. Something decisive. And no human authority reported it. No news coverage. No official record. If containment extends outward when necessary, then any escalation would be managed the same way the village managed me. Not with spectacle. With precision. So here is the truth I have come to accept. The boundary I crossed was not the most important line. The most important line is cognitive. The moment you accept that wilderness may be governed by intelligence other than our own, your relationship with it changes permanently. You stop assuming ownership. You stop assuming superiority. You begin to move differently. Listen differently. Interpret silence differently. If you ever find stacked stones where none should be. If you ever feel escort without visible pursuit. If you ever sense that the forest is observing instead of simply existing. Do not test the boundary twice. The first crossing may be tolerated. The second may be intercepted. The third may not be managed. Because what I found was not a legend hiding from humanity. It was a society containing itself from us. And containment, by definition, implies capacity. The forest is not empty. It is organized. And somewhere beyond the ridgelines, where patrol arcs intersect and acoustic corridors carry low-frequency signals through the ground, a village still stands. Watching. Not waiting to attack. Waiting to decide.